Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another tier list here on the story mode. We are going to be diving into the MCU films. This is my fall 2022 update. It's the last thing besides the holiday special that is coming out with Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I just saw it, so I want to talk about it and the rest of the MCU. So I'm going to be diving into all of that. But before I do so, please hit that like button down below and subscribe to my channel for continued content in the world of pop culture, comics, movies, video games, all sorts of things. I've released quite a few tier lists here in the last few weeks. I'm working on a Legends How to Read for Star Wars as well, and an updated canon one. You can also check out my other channel, Star Wars Lads. That is the channel that I'm on every single week, multiple days a week, to talk about Star Wars. We're talking about Andor right now. We just dropped a new tier list. If you're interested in our canon novels rankings, that is up there on the channel right now. So diving back into the MCU, last time I did a ranking, I released it in May. So I went up to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, everything that had come up to then. So for this tier list, I will be adding Ms. Marvel, Thor Love and Thunder, I Am Groot, She-Hulk, Werewolf by Night, and Black Panther Wakanda Forever. So those will be the new additions. I'm going to run through the rest of them because my opinions have changed a little bit. I was a little too harsh on some things last time, and I was a little too easy on some other things. So I'll be changing up my picks a little bit, but I'm going to talk very, very briefly about all of the other things. This is my third MCU tier list. So if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts on some of these other films, especially the ones that haven't changed their spots, check out some of those other videos because I'm not going to be spending, 2 minutes talking about each one like I did last time. So let's start off with Iron Man. Iron Man is a great origin story. What a wonderful way to kick off the MCU. I still love this movie. I think it is a great, great start. And I'm going to be putting it back in A tier. I think this movie is definitely one of the best, most consistent origin stories. It's the format for the rest of the MCU. So next we have Incredible Hulk, which is a film that almost every single time I watch it, I slightly like it more or slightly like it less. The last time I watched it, I think I said this last May, I liked it a little bit less. This is probably my least favorite MCU movie, at least since my last binge of all of them. So I will be dropping the Incredible Hulk into the F tier. Again, tier lists are always subjective, and they are based on the quality of the franchise as a whole, not necessarily based on that I would actually give this movie an F. I think it is still a decent movie. So now we get to Iron Man 2, another movie that is a bit of a mess. It's an exposition-heavy movie. It's a movie that does a lot of groundwork for setting up the rest of phase one and really the MCU as a whole. I'm also going to be dropping this into the F tier. So now we have the 2011 Thor, directed by Kenneth Branagh. I think this is a really solid movie, one that plays more on the fantasy elements of Thor, the parts that I really, really enjoy about Thor comics, the stuff that Taika Waititi's movies have kind of gone away from. I really kind of wish Thor would go back to this, keep a little bit of the humor, but embrace the Shakespearean fantasy elements that this movie does well. I still like this movie quite a bit. I think it is a little underrated in my opinion. And I'm going to be placing Thor in C tier. So now we have Captain America, the First Avenger. This has always been one of my favorite origin stories, especially from phase one. I think this movie works quite a bit. There are a lot of montages. There are things that skip a little bit over plot. But ultimately, I think this is a really solid package. It introduces the character quite well. I think I put this in C last time, and I don't really know what I was thinking. I've always really enjoyed this movie. I'll probably put it in B tier this time. Next is Avengers 1, the original Avengers from 2012. One of my favorite theater experiences I've ever had, sitting in that room with all of these people, sold out opening night. It was such a unifying experience. One of the early theater experiences that I remember just being so amazing and incredible. And putting ourselves back in 2012, we had never seen a movie like this, never seen a team up superhero movie. This is what started all of that. I know for some people, if you go back nowadays, this movie might seem really simple, a little dated, and kind of just reminiscent of the entire MCU formula. For me personally, since I saw it in theaters in 2012, this movie started all of that. You don't have what made the MCU so great without this. And I will be putting this at the top of my A tier. I think the Avengers is one of the more underrated movies now at this point. So now we have Iron Man 3. I really loved the first third of this movie. The middle third, I think, is a little weaker, but works still pretty well. And the final third kind of completely falls apart, in my opinion. This movie does work on a lot of technical levels. It looks very nice. The story is quick, fast paced, and actually quite exciting. Never been a huge fan of the villains in this movie, but I do think Robert Downey Jr. does a great job here. Some solid stuff here, but again, the disappointment of the Mandarin, even though Trevor Slattery has been kind of redeemed a little bit, and brought back in a more fun way, and the Mandarin character itself. I'm still probably going to give this movie a D tier. I think it is a step up from Iron Man 2 and the Incredible Hulk. So now we have Thor: The Dark World, a movie that I do think is a little better than some people think. I don't think it is the worst MCU film. I do think it has some parts that I actually quite enjoy. Again, villain is awful, not memorable at all. I will be ranking Thor: The Dark World in F tier, but that doesn't mean it's my least favorite Marvel movie. And in fact, I think it's a little better than some people say, despite my low rank. So next is Captain America: The Winter Soldier, an incredible film, one that has a lot of great action, good story, and really pushed the MCU into a bit more of a genre direction. A direction that doesn't just cling to what makes comic book movies conventional, what makes the MCU formula conventional. This movie pushes beyond that a bit more and starts the trend really of taking MCU movies into different directions to be genre specific. Always really enjoyed this one, and I would still put it in A. I would put it above Iron Man. I think it is a really, really solid MCU film. Guardians of the Galaxy, one of the most surprising MCU movies of all time for most of us out there. This movie's hilarious. James Gunn put his stamp on this, and it really kickstarted his second coming of his career with Guardians and then Suicide Squad, and now he's head of DC Films. Hopefully they make some awesome things there. For its weaker elements, I don't think I can put it in S tier, and I do think I have a bit more of a nostalgia kick for the Avengers, but I will be putting it in A tier. I really love Guardians of the Galaxy. Next is Avengers: Age of Ultron, another movie that I think is pretty underrated. I do think this is better than a lot of people say. Just because it's a massive step down from the Avengers doesn't mean it's really a bad movie at all. I think Ultron works quite well. It's the plot structure. It's a little bit of the padding, the exposition that is put there for future films that ultimately kind of doesn't even pay off with Thor and stuff. They go in a completely different direction than what they're setting up in Age of Ultron here. But I do like the introduction of Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, Vision. But this film itself is a bit stretched and a bit messy. For those reasons, I'm still going to drop Age of Ultron in the C tier. Next is Ant-Man, one of the funnier MCU movies, a really entertaining movie that even though its plot is relatively forgettable nowadays, it's a movie that I don't go back to too often. Every time I watch this movie, I have a lot of fun. I think with Ant-Man 1, I would still put it at the top of my C tier. It doesn't quite reach the highs of any of the movies that I'm going to put in B, A, or S. So I think for those reasons, I'll have to keep it down in C. Captain America: Civil War, I think it is the best MCU movie ever. It's actually never come close to anything else for me. I think this is a wonderful film. Every single piece of it. The villain, Zemo, I think is an excellent villain, understated villain. But the movie plays off of the ideologies of our characters. I think this actually honestly might be better than the comic book by Mark Millar. The versions of Tony and Cap we get here are so great. Both actors just at the peak of their powers in this film. Bucky, the Winter Soldier, his arc is quite tragic. The introductions of Black Panther and Spider-Man are also key here. The German airport scene is amazing. And the ending. I love the ending of this film. This is my favorite MCU film, and I will be putting it in S tier. It is an incredible movie. I love it 3000. Next is Doctor Strange, a movie I've gone back and forth on quite a bit. I'm still not 100% sure where I want to rank this movie. It's a movie that I think, as origin stories go, especially in the second half of the MCU, phase 3 and 4, this one does it better than most. I do find the villain still a little underwhelming. I love Dormammu, but I think Caecilius is a little weak of a villain. Just like Captain America: The First Avenger, there are a lot of plot points that are montaged over where we don't really get to see Stephen grow truly. He's a novice, and then now he's almost Sorcerer Supreme. There's a lot of growth that I think is skipped over that I would have liked to see. Despite its visual differences, where it really truly transcends, to me, it's still a quite simple MCU film, one that I don't think really reaches the highs of something like Iron Man. Similar to last time, I do think I'm going to put Doctor Strange in B, but it is really on that bubble for me between C and B. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, a movie that I think has grown in love since it came out, especially since now it'll be 6 years in between 2 and 3. It's a movie that has a lot of heart and I think is really attached to its characters, which elevates this film quite a bit, in my opinion. Some of the jokes are a bit much. It does kind of start that trend where the MCU kills a lot of emotional moments with jokes, but there's still a lot of emotion to be had here. James Gunn, I think, writes a film that is very personal for a lot of these characters and has some nice character arcs, which we don't see too often in the MCU. For those reasons, I'm going to be putting Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 at the top of my B tier. Spider-Man: Homecoming, this was the first Spider-Man film in the MCU, and I think one of the best ones. It is a film that actually truly grasps the character Spider-Man. Everything from his relationship with Tony to his relationship with Ned and the students, the way he's trying to grapple homework versus hero, all of it works so well. There's an incredible shot at the end that parallels with If This Be My Destiny, that 3-issue comic by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, but with Vulture as the villain and all of the rest of the pieces of this film really coming together so well. I'm going to put Homecoming in my A tier, right behind Guardians of the Galaxy and in front of Captain America, the Winter Soldier. So next is Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi's reinvention of the Thor formula, a film that has a great balance of jokes and character. This is one of the most character-centric Thor movies, which is nice and refreshing compared to kind of the jumpy nature of Dark World. Ragnarok does such a great job with Hulk, Thor, Loki, Valkyrie. It juggles all of these characters while also having a great villain with Hela, some solid emotion with Odin. I do think there are times, like Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where some emotional beats are undercut by jokes. I don't really appreciate that. I will be putting Thor Ragnarok at the bottom of my A tier. I do think it is my favorite Thor movie. So next we have Black Panther, the original first Black Panther film. And this movie, I think, is incredible. It does a great job of world building in the MCU. Really, only Black Panther and Guardians of the Galaxy have created these worlds that feel like they transcend the MCU. And Wakanda itself is truly real, living, breathing place in this movie. I've always really loved that. This film works quite well when it dives into those unique elements. It's when it falls back into the superhero formula that I think it falls off a bit for me. I do think for those elements, Black Panther was a little overrated when it came out, but I still think it is one of the better MCU origin stories. I will be putting it at the top of my B tier. Next is Avengers Infinity War, a movie that actually for me has gotten better every single time I watch it. I love this movie. It is the perfect Marvel event film. It has so many incredible action sequences, so many great elements, and Thanos as a character is one of the best things the MCU has ever done. The way they're able to capture the menace, but also the spirit of Thanos is really, really great. And all of the characters really get times to shine in this movie. It's tragic, it's heartbreaking. I won't be putting it higher than Civil War, but I will be putting it in my S tier. I think this is an incredible film. Then following up Avengers Infinity War, we got Ant-Man and the Wasp, which was kind of disappointing because of the highs of Avengers Infinity War with the snap at the end. You're like, man, what's going to be happening in Ant-Man that it's placed like 2 months after Infinity War on the release schedule? And nothing really happens. It's a very small movie, no pun intended. It's a movie that just kind of exists to have an Ant-Man movie and to show why Ant-Man is where he is in Endgame, but it doesn't really do much of its own. The villains are not good. I do not really like really much of the plot of this movie. For those reasons, I will be dropping Ant-Man and the Wasp into D. I think it is a pretty forgettable movie. Then we followed it up with Captain Marvel, a film that has been subject of a little bit of controversy. As origin stories go, I think it misses a lot of steps. There are things that I definitely would have done differently, like Marvel. And the Supreme Intelligence is not quite as intimidating as I feel like it is in the comics. I would have changed that a bit. Carol Danvers is hard to attach to. She's a little distant. There are some cool things with the Kree elements that I do like, but overall, I still am going to have to give Captain Marvel D tier. So we follow up 2 disappointing films with Avengers Endgame, which is probably one of the most emotional, high stakes Marvel movies ever. It's a movie that, with its long runtime, uses every piece of it to its advantage, goes for character work in its first 2/3, and then goes for incredible action, really satisfying conclusions to this whole event. And I love this film. Just like most of you, I think it is incredible. It will definitely be in my S tier, and I will put it higher than Infinity War for me. I think the character work here just raises it above Infinity War. So the epilogue of the Infinity Saga, Spider-Man Far From Home, finishes off what was Phase 3. And I think this movie is really good. I think because we leave New York, though, and city hop around the world, it does lose a bit of what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man, dealing with those emotional stakes of being a kid. But it goes for relationship building on the other side and dealing with Tony Stark's death. I think all of that works really well. It's a bit more scattered. There are a couple scenes that I really just don't like at all. But I think Mysterio also works really well in this film. I will be raising Spider-Man Far From Home above Black Panther at the top of my B tier. So after a year off from the MCU, we got WandaVision to kickstart 2021 for the MCU's return. And this is a really nice show, a show that at the beginning, I think does a little bit more for its plot and intrigue and characters than it does in the second half, but ultimately rounds into a pretty nice package for both Wanda and Vision. I'm not a huge fan of the action part of the last episode, but the character parts I think work really well. There are a few missteps in the show with certain episodes that I don't think quite work too well. I think it goes on a bit longer than it should, but as MCU shows go, I think this is one of the better ones in my opinion, and I would actually put it in B tier. So we follow up WandaVision with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which for me started out a bit okay, and then transitioned in episode 3 and 4 into something that I thought was incredible. Then 5 was a bit slow, a nice character episode, but where was it going? And 6 just completely fell apart. The ending was just so disappointing. The way all of this stuff kind of fell together without really any stakes. So, with all that being said, I will be putting Falcon and the Winter Soldier in D tier. So, our third show in a row in 2021 was Loki, a show that I was not really looking forward to that much. We've gotten so much of Loki over the years. What could be different about the show? And I was completely wrong. The show is incredible. I thought the ending was a bit more lackluster than the rest of the show. I thought the first half of the show was absolutely incredible. I love the mystery, I love the sci-fi in it. But the fact that we're getting a season 2 does make that ending a bit more satisfying to me. I cannot wait to see what happens next. I can't wait for Quantumania to see what happens with Kang there. Overall, the show was great, easily my favorite MCU show, and I will be dropping it in my A tier. So our first film back from 2019 through the pandemic into 2021 was Black Widow, a movie that felt like it should have been in phase 3. This is a very forgettable movie that really has nothing to do with phase 4 and what we're building here in the future. The introduction to Elena is good, but nothing else in this film really stands out. There's not too many action scenes that I love. I do like the beginning. I like a little bit of the darkness, the opening title sequence. For those reasons, I'll be dropping Black Widow in my D tier as well. So after the disappointment of Black Widow, we followed up with Shang-Chi, our first origin story in phase 4, and Shang-Chi is a really good origin story. This movie works on almost all levels. Third act can be a bit messy, but I love the fantasy elements that it goes for. It is a bit traditional and a bit safe, but the dragon stuff and the emotional stakes here are really what holds this movie together. Shang-Chi and his father, Wenwu, the Mandarin, that stuff really, really works. All of the character stuff in this movie is really good. So overall, I wouldn't say I love this movie, but I think it's good enough to drop in about the middle of my B tier. Now we move on to What If, an often forgotten part of the MCU, and a show that took me a long time to get into. I think there are a lot of great highs in this show. The last couple episodes are really good when all the things start to tie together. The Doctor Strange episode everybody talks about, which is really good, and unfortunately doesn't really connect to Doctor Strange the Multiverse of Madness as much as we had all hoped. I'm going to put What If right behind Age of Ultron. Next is Eternals, a movie that if you watch my last tier list, you know I'm much higher on than everybody else. I think this is a really good Justice League movie. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten a really good Justice League movie in my opinion, so this is the best thing we've gotten so far. In all seriousness, I actually think a lot of the character work is really solid in this movie. Love the power sets of a lot of characters. I love the going back and forth across time. And I think as a concept, this is something in the MCU that I'm far more interested in than a lot of the stuff we're doing. I love the cosmic aspects of Marvel, the stuff that's in the Hickman comics, mostly from the Fantastic Four and Avengers and all of that stuff. We started to do a bit of that with Thanos, but I really want to expand on it. I can recognize the flaws in this movie for sure, but for me, most of the good way outweighs the bad. I'm going to put this at the top of my B tier. Next was Hawkeye, a show that I also was not that excited for. I didn't know how much more Hawkeye we could need despite Kate Bishop entering the show. Felt like I was kind of right on this one. This one was a show that I never thought was bad, but never got to any highs for me. It was all pretty bland. I do like the introduction of Kate Bishop. I think Kingpin was a huge missed opportunity. For those reasons, I will also be dropping Hawkeye in the top of my D tier. One of the most forgettable MCU projects, probably in phase 4 as a whole. Spider-Man No Way Home, the most anticipated film of the MCU phase 4, for sure. And this movie delivered. I thought all of the elements of it were great. The return of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were great. The return of Norman Osborn and Otto Octavius, all these characters. They just nailed everything. I think they redeemed a lot of stuff from The Amazing Spider-Man. They also continued the legacy from the Raimi movies. All of it worked so well as being a really nice conclusion for this trilogy of Spider-Man movies. We haven't got too many concluding chapters in the MCU for our trilogies from character films. This movie truly concludes the trilogy, has so many great emotional moments, balances action and emotion so well. And I will be dropping this at the bottom of my S tier. I think it's an incredible movie, and I've really enjoyed all of my rewatches. I think I've watched it like 5 or 6 times by now. So our first MCU project of 2022 was Moon Knight, a show that I was extremely excited for. I've always really liked the Moon Knight character. And I think this show works for the most part. The emphasis on Egyptian gods, the mythology of Moon Knight, all was really well brought to the table here. It all translates quite well, and Oscar Isaac is fantastic in this role. He carries the show along with Ethan Hawke, who's a really good villain in this show. The last episode again falls apart in this show. It's so rushed and does not give enough time for character arcs to wrap up. Unfortunately, it does bring the show down quite a bit for me, despite the high highs that this show does have. And for those reasons, I will be dropping Moon Knight in my B tier. Next is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, a movie that has gotten a little worse for me on subsequent viewings. I know last time I said I really enjoyed it. An interesting MCU movie. It's a movie that goes for the horror elements more so than any MCU movie. The plot itself is a bit messy for me, and as I've watched it over and over again, there are some conveniences and some things that just ultimately kind of don't work anymore for me. I do love the surprise of the Illuminati. I loved seeing Reed Richards and all of that. Great stuff. I would still leave this movie in my B tier. I'm going to drop it quite a bit lower to just in front of Doctor Strange. I really go back and forth between which one I like more. I think Doctor Strange is a bit more of a cohesive film, a bit better made film, but Multiverse of Madness does things that are really unique, stuff that lingers away from the MCU formula that makes it a bit more special, in my opinion. So now we're getting to the new projects, starting with Ms. Marvel, a show that I think works really well in the first half when it embraces its family dynamics, when it embraces the characters of the show, when it gets a bit more bombastic, when it gets into the villains of the show. That's when it falls apart for me. I didn't really love the last half of the show, especially the finale. The finale works a bit better in character than episode 5 and 6 do, but the action and some of the effects, oof, man, they look bad. I am excited for season 2, and I am excited for future appearances of Kamala Khan in Marvels. I do love her family though, so I want to see more. I'm going to be putting Ms. Marvel in C. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but from some of the signs we got here of a really decent show, a show that can use its character, which it develops really well, and expand on it to give us even more from that character's POV, which is what anchors this whole show and makes this show unique and different. I think there's a lot of potential here. So then we jumped into our big July MCU film, Thor Love and Thunder, which was one of the most disappointing MCU films I've seen in a really long time. Thor Love and Thunder, I had huge expectations for. Ragnarok is not just really beloved by me, but even more beloved by a lot of people who love the MCU. This movie felt like a complete mess. The plot was very uninteresting. I felt like it was a very early 2000s movie. It's one of the most early 2000s-y superhero movies that the MCU has made. A lot of plot conveniences, a lot of powers that are just all of a sudden given to people, a lot of things that just feel goofy for goofy's sake, and where Taika is able to embrace some of the cosmic side of what Marvel's created, especially what James Gunn has created in the Guardians movies. Here's some of the stuff that is just brought in. I found frankly kind of annoying. I did not really like the goats. The Guardians of the Galaxy stuff was kind of disappointing that they were only in the beginning of this movie. What they do with Natalie Portman's version of Thor, Jane Foster Thor, was pretty lackluster, although the emotion that's there at the end works for me because I'm attached to this character over the last 11 years. There is something about it that just feels rushed and feels undercooked. And in a way, I think this is one of Taika's worst movies. And especially the thing that frustrated me was the lack of Christian Bale and Gore the God Butcher. Absolutely love that character. That's my favorite Thor comic, the God Bomb storyline. To completely underutilize him while he's actually giving a really good performance and doing a great job as Gore, and to undercut some of his drama with jokes, to me was symptomatic of all of the worst parts of the MCU formula. So for me, disappointment level wise, I'm honestly lingering towards an F tier for Thor Love and Thunder. I do think it's a bit better and a bit more rewatchable than something like Black Widow or Ant-Man and the Wasp or even Captain Marvel. I'm going to put it right behind Iron Man 3 in my D tier. So we shift over to I Am Groot, which is something I have a really hard time ranking here. Obviously, it's the only short form thing we've gotten in the MCU so far, and I think all the shorts are charming in their own ways. There's some that are much better than others. I think I'll drop it at the bottom of C. It's inoffensive. It doesn't really do anything, but I'm looking forward to more stuff like this. I do appreciate when they do this on Disney Plus for Star Wars or Marvel. Give us just random little things that don't really need story, but are just there for our enjoyment and our appreciation of the franchise. Then we jump over to our last big MCU show of the year, which was She-Hulk. She-Hulk for me was really mediocre. I did not really dig the first, 7 episodes of the show. Whenever Daredevil appeared, that was the show. That was the episode for almost everyone that was like, yes, this is really, really good. It was a nice mix of funny and classic, a lot of really good elements. There are some filmmaking stuff here that I think they actually do quite well. They do a decent job of capturing that vibe of a law drama comedy. I think they do a pretty good job of embracing that spirit, especially in the last episode. There's the opening that's, copying the opening of the Incredible Hulk show. But I'm not a huge fan of the fourth wall breaking. I don't think that really worked at all. The final episode, I'm really mixed on because in some parts I love that it does something different and it's not like the immediately wrapped up MCU finale. But in some ways, it also just negates everything you watched. Like everything you got invested in over the weeks was for nothing because now we know She-Hulk can just change whatever she wants. So I'm really tossed up there. I lean towards liking it because it's different and because it doesn't fall into that trap of just being a completely mind-bogglingly rushed finale. But overall, She-Hulk is one of my least favorite MCU things I've seen in a really long time. Giving it an F tier would be really harsh, but I truly don't really like this show that much. It's not that great in my opinion, and but there's room to grow. I do like Tatiana Maslany. I think she does a good job as Jen Walters. There's things here that we can definitely use to elevate for season 2 and whatever we do in the future of She-Hulk. So we get to the biggest surprise of the year, not just because we didn't really know it was coming out, but also because to me, this is the second best MCU thing of the year. This is Werewolf by Night. Werewolf by Night is a really, really good short special presentations, about a 50-minute long film. And I love this. Michael Giacchino directs it, visually iconic. I mean, it was the middle of October, so I was doing my horror movie binges and I'm watching so many horror movies. I love getting into horror in October, and this was just a nice treat, a classic monster movie vibe with Man Thing in it, Werewolf by Night. All of the great stuff about Marvel horror was present here with a nice, short, compact story that was super entertaining. I hope we get these more unique stories that make more genre, more complete in the MCU. If we want to just give a smaller budget to someone to do a special presentation of an MCU character that might not make the money that they could. And maybe the love from those special presentations could kickstart what could be a really awesome film franchise or TV franchise. Cannot wait to see Werewolf by Night and Man Thing return, hopefully with Moon Knight in the picture as well. And we get Blade whenever that movie gets out of development hell. So I cannot wait for future parts of the Marvel horror franchise. Give me Ghost Rider 2. Give me all of it. Midnight Suns. Let's do it. I'm actually going to drop this right behind Black Panther. Maybe I need to rewatch it a couple times. Maybe I'm overselling it, but I thought this was such a nice surprise. So we're getting to the final one. The video is named after Black Panther Wakanda Forever. It just came out last week, and I really dug this movie. I thought the movie, despite lacking Chadwick Boseman, which is, there. Like this movie searches for a purpose in a lot of ways. And I think sometimes that's a hindrance to the film. It's one of the reasons why it kind of rambles on to about 2 hours and 40 minutes. And you feel a little bit of the runtime, not going to lie. But it's so nice and so refreshing to have an MCU film that's about grief and a movie that doesn't undercut its grief and sadness and tragedy with jokes. It doesn't try to get you back on board for an entertaining 2 hours and 40 minutes of fun superhero action. There are good action sequences. There are cool special effects. Those elements of superhero movies are here, but they're here a lot less than you would expect, especially for a long movie like this. It is a solid 3-act movie. And I think the way it creates its characters with Namor, who I think is a great addition to the MCU, this movie is a lot about discovering yourself and discovering identity, discovering what your role in the world is, what your destiny is, and moving on from the things you can't control. I thought all of the messages here were really beautiful. The way it just handles a subject that was going to be hard for all of us, especially the people making the film. So making a movie like this where you can truly feel the emotional stakes that are with not just the characters, but the emotion that's behind creating those characters and creating those decisions. It's a film made with love. It's one of the probably the most director heavy movies in the MCU. I know people have criticized it for being a backdoor pilot for Ironheart, and while those elements don't necessarily feel like they need to be in this movie, I think they're done respectfully and they're done in a way that doesn't really take away from the stakes of what this film is. I'm looking forward to seeing it again, but it's also an MCU movie, maybe for the first time ever, that I don't feel like I have to rush out and see a second time. It's a movie that I want to sit with and think about. And I'm very surprised with the MCU for allowing this movie to be this. It's what the trailer sold, and it's exactly what it is. I really enjoyed it. So for ranking Black Panther Wakanda Forever, it's really tough because I don't know, like it's hard to put a movie without Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther ahead of the first Black Panther movie. But this movie's just so much more unique than the original Black Panther. It's the original has the world building, it has the fantasy and the sci-fi and all of the what makes that world of Wakanda really great. This one is a drama. It's a true drama with action elements, and I really don't know where to rank them. I think they're 1A and 1B. Unfortunately, this movie is the way it is because of tragedy. We're never going to get past that. But there's a lot of things that I think is so mature about this movie, and it's a maturity that I think the MCU could use a bit more of. I don't think I'm gonna be happy wherever I put this. I don't think it could quite go into A for me. It doesn't reach the highs of a lot of these movies, but it's a movie that I've definitely sat with and thought about a lot. Man, I want to put it towards the top of my B tier. I think I would put it right there behind Eternals or right around Eternals. I know a lot of people will be upset about Eternals. I really love Eternals, so you know that this is a high ranked movie for me. So that's everything. That's all the stuff in the MCU for 2022 minus the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special ranked. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on some of the other movies, you can check out my other two MCU tier lists I've posted. You can also check out a lot of the other tier lists I've posted recently, Nintendo Switch games ranked, as well as the Halloween franchise, and then the DCEU. If you're a DC fan, as I mentioned earlier, I'm on Star Wars Labs every single week, at least 2 to 3 times a week over there talking about greatest and latest in Star Wars. So if you want to hear my thoughts on Andor, or you want to hear my thoughts on canon novels, which we just ranked, you can find those videos over there. I do link all of my Star Wars tier lists to my tier list playlist on here. Stay tuned for a lot more content. As I said, I'm working on a How to Read Legends video. I know that's been one of my most requested videos since I put out the How to Read Canon one. And I also will be looking to update that one towards the end of this year once the final canon novels come out. I'm reading Star Wars High Republic Convergence right now. Stay tuned for my thoughts over on Star Wars Lads for that book if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.